Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Great to have you with us. It's a great pleasure to be here yet again for the seventh in a series of seminars organised by the SESAR Joint Undertaking to look at what it is that we need to do to build back better, what it is that we need to do to recover, and the role that technology can play in that recovery as we go forward. And we couldn't have a better group of people to speak to on that subject today. It's absolutely my pleasure to introduce Grazia Vittadini, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Airbus. So obviously talking not about the airframe, but not only the airframe, how the airframe interacts with the ground and so forth. We also have Mr. Patrick Key, who is the Executive Director of EASA, the European Aviation Safety Agency. But Patrick, of course, is extremely well known to SESAR because he was the SESAR Joint Undertaking's original Executive Director. And we have the current Executive Director of SESAR as well, Mr. Florian Gillemay, with us as ever to have this conversation. It's a fascinating topic, and how the technology works with COVID becomes a really interesting question. So perhaps, Grazia, I can start with you and ask you, how has COVID changed your vision for the future? How do you see the future from here?
Well, you know, Andrew, only 9 months ago, the dilemma we were debating around as an industry was centered around how to possibly align the exponential growth of air traffic with our responsibility to advance on climate neutrality for future generations to come. Now, this feels literally like ages ago. Well, instead of talking about exponential growth like we have been in the last few years, some may now wonder how can aviation possibly emerge from the pandemic with climate neutrality still as core long-term competitiveness factor. And while the answer is pretty straightforward to that, because it would be impossible not to. So already before the crisis, it had become accepted that, you know, preserving our climate, preserving the environment is the indispensable foundation upon which to build the future of aviation. And now, well, what we observe is that the corona virus crisis has only dialed up the urgency for a healthy environment. And we believe a green recovery is absolutely non-negotiable. And this is also why, as part of the recovery plan with our European partners, we're really accelerating on that front. So on research in cleaner aviation technology. And we believe in particular that hydrogen does hold, in the sense, exceptional promise as clean aviation fuel. So we were discussing about it briefly. We recently unveiled our Zero E, so 3 hydrogen powered concept aircraft as a cornerstone, really, behind our intent to bring the world's first zero emission commercial aircraft to market by 2035. But my colleagues on the panel, and certainly most of you tuning in today, know there's no, for our industry, there is no silver bullet solution when it comes to decarbonizing the skies. So we're going to have to work on multiple technology pathways. We're going to need to continue pushing forward with the production, the uptake of sustainable aviation fuels, and we're going to need to accelerate also on the digital transformation, on application of digitalization, of more autonomous flight, with the enabling element of artificial intelligence. This will all be, I believe, the new normal when it comes to connectivity and passenger experience in air travel of the future. Wow. So our vision, to summarize, has not changed.
Right.
But we do hope that the crisis will have a sort of silver lining and help us accelerate change.
So it's something that I'm beginning to believe more and more, that COVID hasn't changed anything. It's just accelerated everything. My one hope is that by 2035 you thought of a better name than Zero E, but leave that aside for a moment. I'm really interested. Obviously, I could talk to you all day about the hydrogen aeroplane, but I'm also really interested in your comment about IT and the IT changes that are going on. Specifically, I guess that talks about communicating between the airframe and the ground, and the airframe and the controls and whatever. What's your vision for that?
So digitalization, of course, has many different implications in an industry like ours. It relates, of course, to how you design, manufacture, operate an aircraft, right? So a lot of many projects and also investments really to develop a digital design, manufacturing, and services digital backbone going across the whole company. But of course, there's a significant dimension of it, which I'd like to see significant acceleration on, related to the environment where our products operate. And that is the air, and specifically air traffic, and integration, let's say more globally, of air vehicles in airspace. So we continue considering shaping the future of air travel in a very holistic way, and the ambitions, digitalization ambitions in this sense, absolutely remain unchanged. Also in a COVID affected world, we continue operating an outdated architecture when it comes to our own traffic management. I've done the parallel again already before. When it comes to telecommunications, old black and white photos of telecom operators sitting at these huge switchboards, plugging connections manually. When I think of how we are forcing our operators to work today, well, this is the image I think of, right? It represents how we still operate air traffic today. ATM, air traffic management, will continue playing a crucial role when it comes to minimizing the impact of traffic on flight efficiency, and to keep deviations from most efficient trajectory as small as possible. And that famous 10% we continue matching with the ATM potential is very true. So how are we going to accelerate on digitalizing air traffic management? Our perspective, Airbus perspective, is that we could do so via unmanned traffic management definition. Starting from that, digital unmanned traffic management solutions, we do aim to tackle the ATM infrastructure as a whole, and modernizing it, digitalizing it, making it fit to face the challenges, certainly at European level.
So Patrick, is that your vision, that at the moment the controllers are like telephone exchange operators connecting hooks, and that we've got to move to an era of UAM and things like that?
So I share a lot of what Grazia was explaining. If you look at the VHF radio, which is the safety link between air traffic controllers and the pilots, do you know when the VHF was invented, Andrew?
Well, Marconi invented it in the 1890s. It's a World War I technology. It's a World War I technology.
It's yes, it's 1940s that VHF was used, and to have a very modern sector like aviation still relying on its core safety functions on 1940s technology, that's a disgrace.
So what's the alternative?
So and when you just I'll give you another example, which is people were saying, yes, aviation is global and therefore you need a global standard in order to be able to change it, which is true. And ICAO found or defined a standard for digitalization, which means exchange of emails. Do you know when this standard was developed?
No, you got me there. When was that?
1990.
Right.
Okay, the ATN, so-called ATN standard.
Indeed.
And 30 years later, it's still not implemented. So
why not? Why not?
So all kinds of reasons, you know. The fact that the fleet, the worldwide fleet was very diverse, and they were, you know, the life cycle of an aircraft is very long. So you have aircraft which were flying in our skies, which were 25, 30 years old typically, and you know, to bring in new digital technology on board a very old aircraft is not cost efficient. So there were all kinds of reasons. Then on the side of the ground deployment, it was always, you know, there is too much traffic. We don't have enough capacity, so we don't have the time to train the controllers. We don't have the time to implement it in the ground systems. There was never the time because of the traffic pressure. So there, I fully agree with what you were saying, both of you, which is that, in my view, the COVID crisis should also accelerate things like this. You know, we have a golden opportunity now because, first, a number of airlines are getting rid of their old aircraft, which are polluting more, let's say, and which are not as cost efficient as the latest aircraft. So less and less old aircraft are flying, first point. Second point, there is spare capacity available in the system, which means that we can, it's not about taking risk, but we can spend some efforts, time in implementing new solutions on the ground. And I really think it's the case for digital, but it's the case for a number of changes in SESAR, for instance. It's now time to invest into those changes, into implementing those changes, because when the traffic is coming back again, we won't have the time anymore. So now is the opportunity to do it.
So Grazia, it's your fault for building airplanes that go too well. Should you be building more, you know, obsolescence into what you do? I mean, I've always wondered what would the situation be if Apple made airplanes. You know, first of all, you'd have to change them every 5 years, and secondly, every 2 years, you'd have to work out a different way to put the fuel in. Florian, is that the issue? Do you think? Is it that? Well, sorry, let me rephrase it. Do you think Patrick's right that this is a golden opportunity to jump forward?
Good morning. Thank you, Andrew. Well, I will not disagree to that, of course. I mean, to me, we have clearly an opportunity ahead of us, but this will be difficult. We know it as well, because we have to keep the financing capability within the system. And I think this will be probably the tough part to crack. But regarding the fact that we have here a window of opportunity, I'd just like to pick one example building on what Grazia has highlighted in terms of environmental benefits, or how the flying environment of the aircraft has a role to play in this equation. Today, we have no constraints in the airspace because we have very little traffic compared to what we had about 1 year ago. So we should build on this situation as a new norm to make sure that when progressively the traffic comes back, we set the new procedures, the new tools in order to accommodate this traffic without deteriorating the performance of the trajectory, so that the aircraft can actually fly the way it has been built and designed to fly, which is not the case in a usual day of traffic in Europe. Just to keep in mind what happened in 2008 from that standpoint, when we started to have this capacity crisis. The numbers from Eurocontrol are quite, I think, self-explanatory from that standpoint. We had 3% of traffic increase, but 7% of CO2 emission increase, which shows that the potential we have in managing properly the trajectory of the aircraft is significant. And this is what we have an opportunity to focus upon.
Just to come back, Florian, to what you were saying a moment ago, you know, let's seize this opportunity. Is that really realistic? I mean, isn't one of the issues that the process of getting the technology developed and getting the technology certified and getting the technology approved and then rolled out, isn't that a 20-year plan? Isn't that the problem? I mean, if we could capitalise on this little tiny crisis that's going to last, I don't know, 24 months, how do we do it?
I think if we have this way of thinking in mind, we are doomed to fail. We have to acknowledge today that the pace of technology is not a 20 years cycle. The pace is much faster than that. And to me, the big thing that we do observe in SESAR since I've started to work on this program is the acceleration of research and development. It's the acceleration of innovation, but at the same time, we take more and more time to implement. So we have a kind of growing gap between what technology can offer and how we are actually using it. And this gap is so huge that in the case of data link, as Patrick was mentioning, we are now 40 years after basically the standard and the technology has been invented, which, by the way, was for a different purpose than what we are trying to do today, which is to exchange data, to exchange a lot of information, so that on the ground we don't have to invent or to guess where the aircraft is actually going. And the fact is that today we have solutions for that. And today I do think that we cannot implement technology for the sake of implementing technology. But again, we have a golden opportunity there to say, we have a challenge in terms of environment. We shouldn't give up on that. And our duty in aviation, our duty in air traffic control, and I think that should be as well the duty of the member states, it's to avoid that we have stupid trajectories of aircraft flying in the air as we had just 1 year ago. I mean, we could show the trajectory that were achieved in Europe. This is totally insane. If you show that to youngsters, to students, or whoever has a kind of environmental mindset, they tell you those trajectories should have been forbidden. They shouldn't be allowed to fly like this.
But we're sort of at that irresistible force and immovable object interface, aren't we? I mean, everybody agrees with what you say, but yet change seems impossible to generate. I mean, Grazia, is the solution for you guys to simply not load VHF radios onto aeroplanes anymore and just tell them, that's it, we're done with this old stuff, let's go forward?
It's always impossible until someone does it, right?
Well, indeed,
So again, the ambitions are extremely high. The targets were already set before the crisis. Let's talk about ATM. The ambition, to get rid of all inefficiencies, like the one just mentioned by Florian, by 2040. Okay, that's not a walk in the park. That's a digital European sky objective. So the way to get there is also quite a, I'd call it a no-brainer, such a no-brainer that we even co-signed a paper with Boeing on the topic, right? On how to use UTM to really approach the architecture of air traffic as a whole, to use that as a stepping stone, as a lever to deploy a fully new concept, regardless, okay, whether it's a matter of exponential traffic growth or just complexity. The airspace is finite. It will become more and more complex going ahead. It will not be only commercial aircraft. It will be unmanned air system, urban air mobility, pseudo satellites, you name it, suborbital aircraft. So more and more requirements, really expressing a need for new rules, adapted flight rules, new procedures. And we do share a common vision of a future airspace, Boeing and us, going from low to high altitude in a single airspace system, in a way which will need to be as sustainable as possible. And modernizing this is the first stepping stone to really meet the self-imposed environmental targets we've set for ourselves. So
I mean, this is all terrific and obviously I love it, but how do we get there? that Airbus and Boeing have jointly agreed that we need a significantly more automated and digital control of the airspace, from both the grass, from the grass to outer space, is great. But unless you build aeroplanes that respond to that, and more importantly, I think taking what Patrick was saying forward, stop any other system from working, are we ever going to get to that change? I mean, there's a clear resistance to change from the airline operators and from the ANSPs, because this is what they do today. You're asking incumbents to change, aren't you? Isn't that hard?
Well, there's always a component of resistance to any radical change like the one we are tackling, and it is very clear that at the end, our customers, the airlines, need to be in a position to operate their fleet also in a profitable way. So it would be totally unrealistic for them to alone bear, the cost of whatever new development, be it at platform level, be it at space architectural level. So it needs to be a holistic discussion with all key stakeholders around the table, including the airlines. Absolutely, and this is the same discussion we're having around green technologies, around sustainable aviation fuel.
But my point remains, driving that change is going to be difficult while we continue to have the ability to make no change. Isn't that right? I mean, while we allow people the option of doing nothing and continuing to pander to that, we're never going to make those changes.
I see an increasing level of pressure, political and societal, around the topics of sustainability and environment, which make it really, it's not an option. I don't believe we have an option anymore. And this is also all the public funding type of support out there currently, both at national and European level, both to the industry as a whole, right? Research institution, manufacturers, operators, it all comes with green strings attached.
Well, it didn't for a very long time, unfortunately, as we started bailing out airlines, but leave that aside for a moment. Maybe in the future they will. Patrick, aviation safety really hates radical change, doesn't it? Aviation safety loves incremental stuff. It loves keeping as many systems open as possible. Are you guys the problem here?
What is true is that aviation safety has been built learning from the past and learning from the mistakes of the past. And as such, it is necessarily incremental. This being said, we are changing because we realize that the technology is changing so fast nowadays that you cannot anymore rely on the lessons learned from small incremental steps. And that's and just to come back to the previous discussion, I think I completely agree with Grazia on the fact that the revolution in air traffic management will come from UTM, from the lower sides of the market, which is the control at a low altitude of unmanned vehicles, drones and things like this. Now, where I slightly disagree with her is on the fact that we would have a unified, harmonized solution between UTM and ATM, because I do believe that those are completely different markets, completely different types of environments, which can have different technological solutions. So our approach on UTM, and as you may know, we have proposed a regulation which is currently being discussed in the parliament, in the committee, is to let the technology decide, but we provide performance targets on how safe should it be and what it should be about. And that's, I think, the right approach for regulators such as us, which is to say, safety should be a target, and what we would ask from the technology providers is that they prove to us that they can reach a safety level which is at least the one that we have today. And we are not imposing anything in terms of technological choices. And that's, I think, a major change compared to the way in which safety was done 5 years ago or 10 years ago. We are going towards more what we call performance-based approaches, because the technology is changing so fast that we, as the regulators, may not have the latest knowledge on the technology, and it's much better to ask the industry to commit on a safety level and to prove to us that they can meet the expectations. So that's the way we are approaching it. And when you look at the drone market, I think the regulations are not the limiting factor on the development of drones so far.
We've sort of got two issues going on here, haven't we? We've got all this future technology in drones and what have you, and Grazia, I'll come back to you in a moment to ask whether you agree that the drone market, or the low-level stuff and the higher stuff, is separate, given that you build both, or you're looking at building both. But we've also got the other problem I'm still trying to chase up, which is how do we get rid of the old stuff that's on the back? Because whilst that's there, there's no incentive for a lot of operators to change, particularly in these economically difficult times for airlines. One of the comments I've noticed on the chat, incidentally, is that first you've got to fix the airlines and then you can worry about the green environment. I'd be interested in your views on that. But Patrick, I'm still very keen to push the point about how do we stop the old technology being used? I mean, is it a mandate? Is it a drop-dead date? What is it?
So, within SESAR, we were looking at concepts such as best equipped, best served. Depending on the level of technology that you have on board, you receive a different type of service.
But don't we need to get to poorly equipped, no service?
Possibly, but it's a policy. But Florian is better placed than me to talk about it. But do you know who is the first ANSP in the world who is going to have in operations a full SESAR compliant system? Do you know who?
Now, this is one of these weird things where, normally I ask the questions and you do the answering.
So Florian has the answer.
What's the answer?
Florian.
Sorry?
Florian has the answer. I won't give it.
Oh, Florian has the answer. Florian, try to you. What's the answer to that question?
It's not in Europe. That's what I can say. Unfortunately, it's more towards the Middle East. If that's what Patrick wanted me to say.
And no, but that's very interesting, because you have this very significant aeronautical country in the Middle East, which is investing into a full SESAR system for the ground, and they are going to have an agreement with their local carrier, national carrier, on the fact that the national carrier is going to equip the compatible technology on board their aircraft, and then potentially they would propose a better service to the aircraft which are equipped. And then guess why? Airlines who want to continue to take off and land at those airports will receive an incentive to invest into the new technology. And soon, after some years, because it takes years, you would have a capacity which is reserved for the high technology, all the aircraft which are equipped, which is 80%, 85%, it's a policy discussion, but 85% of the capacity of the airport will be reserved for high technology, because you have a higher throughput, you have a higher capacity with higher technology, and just the remaining capacity will be available for the aircraft which are not equipped. That's certainly a very good way to implement new technologies and give more incentives to the ones who are investing in getting a better service. That's what we did as well with the noise. At some stage, we forbid access to some airports for very noisy aircraft. And I believe that at some stage, the policymakers in Europe or around the world would have to do something similar for air traffic management. That's the way to go. And as far as newer technologies are concerned for UTM and things like this, I think it's even simpler. If you want to access an urban airspace, you have to have on board a certain technology, otherwise you just cannot access the airspace. That's easier.
So again, we're back to a policy point, aren't we? I mean, I agree with you that we should make increasingly the capacity only available for people that are best equipped or equipped with the right sort of things. The question only, I guess, is the angle of that slope, isn't it? Whether we allow 40 years or 4 years is sort of a policy decision. And we're in that place at the moment, and we are in this funny place right now, aren't we, where there isn't the traffic. So we could introduce a bunch of changes, but the airlines can't afford to upgrade the technologies or whatever. And so, Florian, lots of topics I need to talk to you about. I realised SESAR last week put out its most recent update on UTM and UTM technologies and where we're going, which I summarised as, good progress, lots of work to do, I think it's fair to say. What's your feeling on what Patrick was just saying, though, about driving the change? I mean, how do we fund all this going forward?
Well, there are different things. Just to pick up maybe on the UTM example, I think for me what's really interesting in UTM are two things. The first thing is what we thought in air traffic management was the most complex issue, which was to have the kind of brain capacity to manage trajectories, is something which is no problem for the UTM people. Because all the vehicles, all the devices, they come with communication capabilities as native and with a lot of computing power on board, and with the ability basically to exchange a lot of data and information with what could be a ground system. What is on the other hand their problem is what we have addressed in aviation, which is basically how you position the device properly, the level of performance you have for communications, the level of performance you have for navigation, and so on. And this is where I do see a lot of complementarity between the two worlds. I think we can really learn from the experience of UTM, and that's why we've tried to achieve over the 3 years of project activities that we've done in SESAR. We can learn from them, and we can as well help them to progress. And this is where I think the two worlds are coming together, and this is as well, I think, the spirit of the initiatives that Grazia was mentioning between Airbus and Boeing, to say, okay, we can really work together to build something different in the future. What is interesting as well from, I would say it's more how we work with those newcomers. They have a very different attitude to the ones we have in aviation. They are not like, we've got a solution, please put a piece of regulation on this VHF radio or on this ATN baseline, whatever. They are more in the look for a challenge. So they are really saying, okay, what do you want us to do? What is the level of performance you want us to achieve? And this dialogue is very useful because they are not trying to sell you something. They are trying to cope with the requirements you are setting to them. Sometimes they fail, by the way. Sometimes they are making promises that they cannot meet. But it's really good to see that it's a different attitude than to say, okay, I have to comply with this piece of software, I have to comply with this piece of standard. No, it's a compliance with a performance requirements that they are looking for, which is pretty much what Patrick was describing. Now to come back to what makes sense in terms of accelerating the pace of implementation, I think we have to stop to incentivize the slow movers, which is pretty much what the current system is doing. We have airlines which are the most equipped airlines with the highest technology aircraft, whether it comes from Boeing or from Airbus, which are paying for ground systems that they are not able to use. And not only that, but they are paying for the systems that they cannot use, like the data link communication. So as long as we allow for this type of behavior in the system, we are not going to make progress, like it was the case on data link. Look at what happened again. I think we could draw lessons for hours on that. We had a number of ANSPs which were late on the mandate. What happened to them? Basically nothing. They were subsidized by EU funds to catch up, while the other ones who were on time didn't get any kind of reward for that. So this is one key.
There's another issue I could raise as to why that was, perhaps to do with the fact they were French, but let's leave that aside. What we're doing at the moment is we're not only not incentivizing the fast movers, we're punishing the fast movers, aren't we? And that's the issue, I think. How do we turn that around and start to drive everything forward? And so perhaps to bring it back to Grazia's very first point, which is, to what extent is the sustainability and the green agenda able for us to piggyback on to try to drive some of these changes, do you think? Question for the panel. Anyone who wants to take that point?
Well, maybe I can start. I think we have a golden opportunity because aviation is going to be in a recovery mode. And there are different qualities to the recovery that we can incentivize, and definitely the recovery should be a green recovery. And what I would like to add is possibly that the recovery should be a technologically, technologically positive recovery, which means that a lot of the problems that we had for the implementation of new technologies was the equipage of the fleets. Okay, but now that let's face it, for the next 2 years, mostly modern aircraft, because they are more cost effective, are going to fly. It's a golden opportunity, I believe, to be at the same time efficient in terms of environment, but also efficient in terms of technology. Because as soon as we get a certain consistency or homogeneity, I don't know if the word exists in English, in the fleet, then we can start to really make progress on the implementation of new technologies on the ground as well. So I really do think that there is an opportunity nowadays in the next 1-2 years, because capacity is likely not to be a major issue for air traffic management. There is really an opportunity to be greener, to learn how to give greener trajectories, to come back to what Florian was saying, but also to incentivize the implementation of new technologies, also as part possibly of the recovery package.
Right. Grazia, do you agree with that?
Yes. At Airbus, we're absolutely convinced that a green recovery is non-negotiable. So we remain absolutely steadfast in our commitments to decarbonize the whole sector. Now, as we already stated, the crisis can be really the accelerator to force all actors to work more closely together and really build back better. And let's not forget, especially in these times, of course, we're going to have to consider the competitiveness of the sector, and specifically of the European transport sector. And how do we make sure, how do we ensure this competitiveness? How do we safeguard it? We need to develop a European technological independence and innovation capacity, really investing very clearly in research and innovation, in structural projects to allow us to go into technologies which will make it through the market.
So that's a really good way to segue back to the discussion about UAM and those sorts of things. Patrick takes a view that perhaps the two are separable or severable. But Airbus, that was Freudian, Airbus has already committed itself to being really all in on the UAM sort of market. I presume you see UAM as sort of part of a continuous spectrum with all the other aircraft. Is that right?
Well, definitely a coexisting component. So in this sense, the two systems, if not integrated, UTM and ATM, must be seamlessly connected interoperable across country. The UTM system we're looking to develop needs, of course, to be compatible with any ATM upgrade, and needs to be interoperable between different service providers, different vehicles, operation types, countries, existing ATM systems. So definitely you cannot develop the two separately from one another.
So where do you see the responsibility lie between the vehicle, the airframe of whatever shape, and the ground? And then secondly, to what extent do you think the ANSPs have a role in that?
Well, the underpinning main principle is safety, first of all, right? Safety first, always. Meaning the safety both at platform and also at in terms of reduction of risk and workload of ATC in increasingly complex spaces must be our driving factor and main underpinning principle. So based on that, the roles and responsibilities need to be defined.
Right. Patrick, what about you? Where do you see the line between the airframe, if you like, and the ground?
So for UTM, we are talking about completely new types of vehicles, which are for most of them completely automated, which means that you would need to rely much more on the capability of the aircraft to avoid collisions, basically. First point. But you would also need to rely a lot on what we call the tactical separation between the aircraft, because the trajectories are going to be defined from the ground and before the flight is happening, or even reshaping the trajectory according to events and things like this. But it's not in the order of seconds. It's in the order of minutes, to put it very simply. So I do believe that the distribution of roles between the ground and the airframe is going to be significantly different, because we are talking about mostly drones flying in an urban environment with a time of reaction which is completely different from an aircraft flying in the upper airspace. I completely agree with Grazia on the fact that we need to make sure that the UTM and ATM systems are interconnected, interoperable, because the difficulty is going to be, as always, at the interface. And how do you deal with typically, other vehicles which are flying in cities, such as helicopters, police helicopters, emergency helicopters, and things like this. So we really need to make sure that the two systems can operate one with another. But in my view, it's it's different philosophies, different concepts. Now, for the responsibilities of the different actors, the ANSPs have definitely a responsibility in terms of sharing the information on airspace, sharing the information on traditional transport vehicles, traditional traffic, and so on and so forth, and the other way around, which is the ANSPs have to know what is going on in the UTM airspace in order to make sure that they can protect the conventional traffic from drones and unmanned aircraft. Now, does it mean that the ANSPs should be in charge of UTM? Yes, possibly, but not mandatorily. So I believe that in some cases, of course, ANSPs would be the best placed to become UTM service providers. But in other cases, there could be also other types of organizations which are better placed. It has to be on a ad hoc basis. And as far as our regulations are concerned, we have kept things quite open.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to see that as the future, isn't it? So where we go from here. But that actually brings me to my last question, which is, where do you think our focus should be in the short, the medium, and the longer term? Where should we be focusing our attention on the technology, focusing our expenditure, and things like that? So maybe we go Patrick, Grazia, and then Florian. Good to see you back, Florian, at the end, if you could. So very briefly, because we are quite short on time, but thanks, Patrick, if you would.
So very briefly, green recovery, it has to start now. And, I know that Airbus doesn't like it, but you can talk about cash for clunkers. Is that the right term?
Yes.
It's a great opportunity to have more modern aircraft equipped with the best technology available at that time for ATM. So it has to start now, and it should start now for sure. And then I think that we need to talk to the NSPs about the green recovery from their side as well. What does it mean? What does it entail? Are there changes, investments which are needed in order to make it more green? And as part of the green recovery for NSPs, I do believe that there should be a technological component which would provide incentives to modernize the systems.
Cash for clunkers, good news for you, Grazia, isn't it? People buying new aeroplanes.
We serve the market just like our competitors do.
Of course you do. So what's your idea for where should we be putting our focus?
I can only really support all what Patrick has just stated. If not now, when? If not now, when? Let's not forget other important aspects of what we've just discussed linked to standardization. So progressing on that green transition and path, very difficult path of change means also having to have the edge on implementing new standards worldwide. We're going to need a very sound European framework as a key enabler to achieve this. Europe can and must lead the transition to zero carbon worldwide aviation. And we're going to need to make sure we have all actors on board to ensure success. Right. And we're looking, of course, to SESAR with a lot of interest, with funds, with resources, to really make sure the single European sky does start tangibly taking shape.
So, Florian, I thought that was good news for you that everyone's looking to SESAR JU with the resources to put in place an implementation plan, because I can't help but think a lot of what we've talked about today is actually political, not technological at all. And how do we drive the political change? And I suspect it's by having a plan that is credible and that everyone signed on to. Where do you think we should be putting our focus, short, medium, and longer term?
Well, I think the green recovery path that has been depicted by Patrick and supported by Grazia is where we can act as well in the context of SESAR. I would just like to add to that we can act by incentivizing the early movers, the ones who really want to take that path, that are geared towards it, geared towards the usage of technology for greener trajectory, but as well by connecting the value chain of modern aircraft, proper behaviors of airlines, airports in terms of environmental behavior, is what we can do, for instance, through the notion of grid aviation demonstrators that we are preparing in the context of the future program. So that basically the ones who are ready to move have through SESAR a platform to take the first steps, and as well some financial advantage to take those first steps.
Right, so we need political will, we need a sensible plan, we need to stop researching and start deploying perhaps, and the opportunity perhaps exists now like it never has before. Ladies and gentlemen, we've run out of time, but I'd really like to thank Grazia and Patrick, as well as Florian, of course, for what I think was a really interesting conversation, which could have gone for another 2 hours, to be honest. I had to keep chopping things down, and I apologise for that. This is the last in our current series of webinars, but I do hope that you'll agree that we should carry on this conversation for as long as is necessary. So I wish you all a very good day, and I hope that you stay safe and sound, and I hope to see you soon in person, very soon indeed. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Merci Patrick, merci Grazia.
Thank you.